takes a cool cat to blow a horn on LaSalle and Rampart Street. The combos play with.
Throughout the years, the architecture of New Orleans has been influenced by the city's climate and historical events.
Two major architectural regions of the city are the Garden District and the French Quarter. Each gave a unique legacy to New Orleans' architectural footprint in the world. Hello, my name is Rachel and I'm sitting next to the mighty Mississippi River on the levee about 8 miles upriver from the old suburb of the Garden District in New Orleans, Louisiana. Here where I'm living is a relatively new suburb called River Ridge. 209 years ago, in 1803, Napoleon sold this land to the United States in Louisiana Purchase. Americans began to move to New Orleans where the French and Spanish have been settled since the 1700s. The economy was booming from 1803 to 1840 because of trade at ports and manufacturing along the river. New coming Americans who prospered planned a suburb 2 miles up the river from the French Quarter with spectacular mansions and architecture, which is called the Garden District. Come, I'll show it.
It takes a cool cat to blow a horn.
Colonel Short's Villa, an Italianate-style house, was built in 1859 for Kentucky Colonel Robert Short. The wrought iron balconies and railings have cornstalk motifs. The colonel's wife missed the cornfields from her home in Ohio. Therefore, the colonel bought her a cornstalk fence. Commander's Palace Restaurant was established in 1883 by Emile Commander, who set up on the grounds of the former Livideus plantation. At 2605 Britannia Street is the Briggs Staub House, built in 1849 for an Englishman. It is an example of Gothic Revival architecture, which was uncommon in the Garden District. The Musson Bell House at 1331 3rd Street, built in 1850, is an example of Italianate architecture. James Gallier Sr. was the designing architect. Toby Westfeld House, the only example of post-colonial Creole architecture that can be found in the Garden District, is at 2340 Britannia Street.
Nobody does it the way we can.
Americans that originally came were wealthy people who, from New York and Boston and Philadelphia, who came down to make their fortune in New Orleans in shipping and other businesses. It was a great coup for the United States to gain control of the mouth of the Mississippi River. So many of the homes in the Garden District were built for and by these wealthy Yankees, frankly, who came down and built their mansions here. We think of them as quintessentially Southern homes with their balconies and verandas and so forth. And in fact, they are. They reflect the tastes of this area, but they were built mostly.
Professor Longhair and Dr. John.
The Garden District per se has been incredibly unchanged over the years. Many other neighborhoods were changed by civil war or natural catastrophe or other trends in the city. But the Garden District, because it was always a wealthy neighborhood, was pretty much almost immune.
Hello, my name is Eugenia, and I'll be giving you a brief overview of the architecture in the French Quarter.
I think you have to go back to when the French first came to Louisiana. The city of New Orleans was founded in 1720. The French found themselves faced with a pretty inhospitable and unfamiliar climate and geography. You know, it flooded every spring. The soils were terrible. It was a humid, dank, uncomfortable climate. So they learned how to adapt. Their first attempts were really rather poor. They were living in crude palmetto huts, and they did a poor job. They imported some styles from French Canada, and probably didn't fare too well. The first Ursuline convent was built in 1730s, and 10 years later it was falling all to pieces. So they had to learn how to construct not only higher quality structures, but structures that were adapted to the locale. They did that with their Ursuline convent. They used a construction method using native materials, that was bousillage or colombage construction that was strong and durable. They used cypress wood, which was native material, which was very resistant to rot, and were able to construct it in that manner. Other things about the climate that affected the city, of course, it was a humid climate, so they had plenty of windows and plenty of high ceilings and cross ventilation through the buildings, and they also enjoyed porches. They would have a lot of porches. As we know, they would be a lot more comfortable in the climate. So the next style that they brought in from the West Indies, Haiti in particular, was the West Indies raised Louisiana cottage. Now, a lot of those were typical plantation home, more rural, outside the confines of the French Quarter. Pito House being an example on Bayou St. John, but it manifests itself in the French Quarter in Madame John's Legacy, okay, which was the first floor is brick, so that it's able to sustain wetting by the occasional springtime floods of the Mississippi River. Then the second story is made out of bousillage, which is a stud frame wall with Spanish moss, cow manure, and mud placed on cypress lath, which was a lightweight construction that actually didn't allow to put too much weight on the second floor, and therefore it kept the houses from settling in the soft Louisiana soil. But it also had another feature called a gallery, in the sense that in the Appalachia they call it a dog trot house. It's a house with 2 rooms on each side, but a breezeway that acted as sort of as a hallway down the middle to keep them cool. And that was a very comfortable area to go in during the summer's heat. So that style probably came first. Another style that became a little more urban was called the Creole cottage, which too kind of shows Caribbean influences on it. And I guess it's most typical, noted for the fact that the French houses, as distinct from the later by the time the Americans came after the Louisiana Purchase, they had hallways in their houses, they're kind of English style, with hallways to circulate from room to room. But the French didn't do that. Whether you're talking about the raised Louisiana cottage or the later Creole cottage, they typically had 4 rooms, and they went from room to room to room. Or in the case of the raised cottages, they might have used the outside gallery to circulate from room to room. But they also then would have in the Creole cottages, they might have 2 little cabinets on the back of the house, and they would surround a little porched area called a loggia. Now, of course, there'd be a patio too, which was pretty just utilitarian, where they might, do whatever heavy laundry or killing chickens or, whatever needed to happen, chopping wood. So that's the next style is the Creole cottage. I guess Lafitte's blacksmith shop is an interesting example of that. It actually shows its construction, which was called briquette entre poteaux, which means brick between posts. So that style there. The brick was kind of soft on the outside face, so they wanted to cover it with a lime stucco, sand stucco, to protect it from the rain and from the humidity, so that it wouldn't slag off. So those are some native materials that they used to good advantage.
You can dance up and down on bourbon.
It's interesting in that most of the buildings in the French Quarter are not French, but are rather Spanish. That's because, the Spanish acquired Louisiana in 1763 at the Treaty of Paris at the end of the French and Indian War, the Queen Anne War. And the Spanish took over, and their era lasted from 1763 until 1803, when the United States acquired Louisiana and New Orleans and the Louisiana Purchase. But two significant events happened for both fires. In 1788, on Good Friday, and then again in 1794, there was a second fire, and these fires were devastating. They just, the first fire probably just destroyed 3/4 of the French Quarter, and the second fire, destroyed a good, another 20-30%. So as a result of those two fires, the Spanish governor at the time decreed, to put a building code in place to try to prevent the spread of these fires in the future and prevent them from starting or spreading. So they required that materials of construction would be, virtually all brick or brick with cement-covered timbers, and also that the roofs, which in the past had been either primarily cypress or wood shingles, or perhaps in some cases thatch, could not be constructed of that, but had to be constructed of tile or slate or brick. We began to see carriageways that would go down one side of the building, perhaps to a little patio, and then the rooms would be, off the house proper would be off to the side. A good example of this kind of construction is the Bosque House. Another one is the building that houses the historic New Orleans collection too. And they're pretty good examples of that Spanish architecture. Another type of building that came into prominence during the Spanish era and is also found a reflection of the more urban environment that they found themselves in is called an entresol building. That's a building that first floor housed a commercial enterprise, usually a shop, and then there was a second story, the upper stories, if you will, that represented the living quarters of the family. But there was also a small half story in between the first floor and the second story, which served as a storage area for product and wares and commercial warehouse for storage. And typically the windows would from the doorways of the first floor would kind of rise up and provide some light into that second story. Entresol, I think, means between floors. So that area there for that second story, and there's a number of those in the French Quarter, which are pretty interesting.